Good evening and welcome to the webinar, Guidelines for SU Grades, Substantial Progress in Grading in Doctoral Capstone Courses. This is Lori Bedford from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and it's my pleasure to be here with some representatives of the Center for Research Quality to talk about this important topic with you. So thank you for taking time out of your evening to be with us. First of all, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have with us Deborah Inman from the Center for Research Quality. Deborah, do you want to say hi?
Hi, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Deborah. We also have Laura Lynn. Laura is the Executive Director for the Center for Research Quality. Laura?
Hello, everyone. It looks like we have a bit of an echo. Welcome and glad you're with us tonight. Thanks.
We do. So if you were on the phone, if you could be sure to mute your computer speakers, that will help. Also, if you're on the phone, if you could just mute your phone too when you're not talking, that will help with that background noise. And I already hear that it's gone, so thank you so much for that. So before we get started, with a lot of great information to share with you tonight, but just a few housekeeping things in case you've not been in an Adobe meeting before, or if it's been a while. You'll see on your screen here in the main part is the PowerPoint presentation, and that's where you'll see the content for tonight. If you look over here to the left, the screen that you're seeing, the sample is a little bit different than I have it set up here. So actually just look over here in the left towards the bottom of the page, and you see a Files little box, and in there is the PowerPoint presentation that you'll also be seeing on your screen. So if you'd like to download that, follow along, save it, just click on that and you can do so. I'll also be sending you a copy of that after the webinar today, along with the recording of today's session. In addition, over to the left, just above that Files box, we have a chat. Feel free to use this chat to share your thoughts, your questions. We'll be answering them throughout the webinar. Any suggestions you have or perhaps practices that you have you'd like to share, we'd love to hear them. Over at the right-hand side is the list of participants. You can see which of your colleagues are here with you tonight. And also at the top of your screen, you see a little man with his hand raised. If you just click on that, if you'd like to share something verbally, you can raise your hand and I can activate your microphone if we're on voice over IP. Or if you're on the phone, you can unmute and ask your question or share your suggestion or however you want to share with us today. We'd love to hear from you either through the chat or through the audio. So again, we're recording today's session. We'll have that available for you after, and I'll also send a copy of this PowerPoint. Our presenters for today, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, I believe.
Yes, welcome everyone. And as some of you may be aware, and some of you it may be newer as you're maybe newer to the university, we had enhanced grading guidelines for the assigning of an S4U implemented last August, so it's been a year. And this is really to help you in working with your students in your doctoral capstone shells and being able to, so there can be more accountability and really support progress for them. There's webinars were presented last fall, and certificates for faculty participating in all three are available. And that's the SU Grading Guidelines Policy, Successful Practices for Substantive Progress, and we had one of those sessions today, and helping students understand the SU Grading Guidelines. We've learned a lot this year, and we've added to this session in that way in terms of what are some of the best practices and some of the things that you could use some more information on. Just so for those of you who feel very, very familiar with this policy and very experienced in it, this is more of an introductory overview, but we will be digging deeper, and there will be follow-ups from this. We're working on several things like discussion forums and other types of experiences where you can get support and connect with other faculty. So more to come on that, and a heads up on that. But I also know for some of you, if you thought that this was very, the next session on this as opposed to what was last year, this is still an overview with some updates. But we will be reviewing the policy and the requirements and ways to best work within this policy. And so some other webinars that I think you'll find that are related that you'll find very interesting. Successful practices in mentoring doctoral students, and we had one of those today, and that's one of our, one that we'll continue to have. Early engagement of URRs with committees, which is a common issue that comes up, and we're really thinking about the student experience, supporting progress, ensuring quality, and but also making sure that there is a cohesive student experience, and that so we're going to explore ways that you can engage with the URR earlier to help support progress. Helping students understand the enhanced grading guidelines. That's another one, as issues might come up, and that's with Bob Brandt and Gina Dyson, as well as Deborah and myself. And committee roles and desired practices. This is a one that is also a very popular session, and really looking at how committee members can support progress, whether you're the chair, the second member, or the URR, and really also sharing some great examples from some of our very experienced committee members here at Walden that I think, and also we have a document on that information to really highlight how you can work most effectively in that role. So today, we'll be, going over this policy. I do understand that for many of you, some of this may be new. In a large university like ours, there's a lot going on, and maybe you missed it last year, or you may be newer to the university. So we're going to be reiterating that. Key elements of the grading guidelines, a quality term plan, reviewing the components of a quality term plan. This has come up, and we're really going to, focus on that a little bit. And there'll be more after this to support as well in terms of, because a lot of it rests on developing a clear term plan. Special circumstances. This has come up a lot as well. And so we're going to be going into when there's issues come up for students that were unexpected, how to address those issues, and look at really some examples of some successful practices for working with students within this guideline. And so I'm going to pass the baton to Deborah to kind of talk about the policy overall and what this is all about. Deborah?
Thank you, Laura. Now, as Laura mentioned, tonight we're reviewing the enhanced grading guidelines. Even though we have been have had these implemented for a year now, there still seems to be questions, and I think it's still very difficult for many faculty to make that call between the satisfactory and the unsatisfactory grade, just based on the continuing questions that we continue to receive. So we wanted to review the basic guidelines is 20% devoted to planning activities, and those activities don't have to just be at the beginning of the term, and in fact, we'd like to think that those planning activities actually are spread out throughout the term and revisiting the term plan. And then 80% on what we call progress activities. One of the things that we want to take just a minute to talk about is, this policy was enhanced so that we would have university-wide consistency regarding grading. At the same time, we wanted to make certain that there were additional program-specific guidance. At the time that some programs had started to think about ways to hold students accountable. So we wanted to make certain that this was a university-wide policy that, could someone mute their phone? We have a phone ringing in. That's A little distracting? Thank you. As I was saying, even though we have a university-wide policy, some programs have gone a little farther and provided even more specifics within that 80 and 20%. So be sure and have your faculty refer to the program syllabus for specific requirements for your program. And again, as we mentioned, 80% or above is a satisfactory grade. 79% and below is an unsatisfactory grade. You know, what's really important is making certain that there is a term plan that's very specific, and we know that this means the chair has to work and be very engaged with the student that first week of the course, because the submission of the term plan is required within the first 7 days, as you all know. So one of the things we want to make certain is that the student is getting your feedback, and the two of you are working together, the mentor and the chair, to develop a term plan that's feasible for this student, that has goals that can actually be met during this time and that are appropriate for where the student is. And so in looking at the planning activities, you know, those are some examples of some of the planning activities, developing that term plan. And then as the term goes along, revisiting that term plan as needed. You know, when looking at progress activities, I know, you know, different programs have different types of requirements, but we do want to make certain that there is documented progress throughout the term indicating whether the student is making progress toward those goals and providing the work products as outlined. We need to make certain that the student is never surprised by a grade at the end of a term. So having that communication from the very beginning and continuing throughout the term so the student knows if they're making the expected progress or not is very, very important. Laura, I'm going to turn the baton back over to you to talk a little more in depth about the term plan categories.
I'm happy to. Thank you, Deborah. You know, so things that are covered within the term plan, you know, areas where you want to be setting goals are submission of drafts and other materials, so you can set some specific goals there. You know, demonstration of satisfactory doctoral quality work, so that's important, and that might be also a specific aspect you want to include. Any activities that support dissertation completion, so that goes beyond just the submission of drafts. There may be things that need to happen in terms of if you determine that some skills need to be built so the student is more ready. Maybe they need to attend a dissertation intensive. Maybe there's some other things that you want to recommend to help them, and that can be a goal that shows that they are working and making progress. Academic coursework, for those of you that still have CAM students, there is academic coursework or things that they still need to complete. They may be completing Residency 3 or Residency 4, and that's all part of, that could be included as well. And, currently there's a requirement for participation in mentor-led discussions. And I just want to emphasize there, and that's something as we get into best practices, there's ways that, and we have some, examples, and we can connect you to them even beyond this, in terms of types of discussions that really do support progress and collaboration within the environment. So they're meaningful. And also just sort of a more to come. We are working on developing a pilot right now, and there will be significant enhancements to the research classroom in the future that will help to make this a more collaborative, engaging environment for you working with your students and students working together at various stages. So I just want to let you know about that. But it is a requirement right now that they do participate in the mentor-led discussions. And but we do support you creating discussions that are meaningful and do support progress. So, we look at submission of, appropriate goal categories, submission of drafts, and I think, it's good to be as specific as possible and to talk to your students. A big part of this and a big part of this working is knowing your students and talking to your students and coming up with reasonable goals to ensure that they are making progress and progress that they can manage. And sometimes this includes having discussions about things they'll need to adjust in terms of being able to meet these goals. And really looking, so helping them also understand what it means to do doctoral quality work. And it's one thing that's interesting we've learned is a lot of times when students are doing sub-quality drafts and they're just in multiple iterations and they don't seem to be making much progress, they're not really using the checklist, the rubrics from the start. So just even pointing them to that from the moment they're entering your shell and the moment you're working with them, remind them you use this as a guide, this is how you'll be evaluated, checklist, rubrics, templates, that can save a lot of time. Activities that support dissertation completion. So there's, various things. Might be IRB, oral conference, data collection, analysis, any academic coursework that's remaining, CAMs, if it's a program that still has CAMs, residency attendance, and discussions, as I had mentioned before. And there needs to be a submission of reports before the last day of the course, and that there is, doctoral quality work. And I think this, while this may be an adjustment for some students, I think it can be very helpful to you, but also very helpful to them. Deadlines are set, and some faculty, some very experienced faculty have recommended not only having, the basic deadlines that are in the quarterly plan, but working on weekly deadlines, monthly deadlines to help them along the way. And then if there is an issue early on, there can be an adjustment. If it's if for some reason it's unrealistic or something happens, that way there really is that, making it as reasonable as possible and making this an active tool, not just something that's submitted at the beginning and is not met at the end, but really working together, looking at the document on a regular basis and seeing how they're doing based on that. And then, as Deborah mentioned before, basically it's that 80% or above, and we are mindful that the programs vary. Some of you have a point system, and some of you do not. But so there are some things that are program specific, but really to make that 80% is really need to participate in the course expectations, and really I think making sure you're aware and looking at the syllabus within your program for those program level specifications, because in some cases there is a very specific point system. And this is really just another overview of the guidelines themselves. And yes, a term plan does have to be submitted within 10 days. That's a requirement. Not 10 days, 7 days, I'm sorry. And it's a good opportunity for long-term and short-term planning. I really recommend that, they're, using, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but using multiple methods to connect with your students. Phone calls. Some students really, that makes all the difference for them. Technology, ways to really ensure that they're making progress and that they're moving along. And sometimes that's especially helpful, a phone conversation or video conference, something like that, for that initial planning phone call, to make sure it's as meaningful as possible and that they really understand how to develop a good term plan, and that what comes out of that, the ultimate term plan is something that you both feel very comfortable with. And then, I don't know, Deborah, did you want to talk a little bit about this? When an S is assigned for issues outside of the student control, this came up a lot. We want to be really clear about it.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. We continue to get questions from faculty about what do you do in a situation where a student is delayed, but it really is no fault of the students. That would be things like when they have delays in gaining access and approval from an agency or university outside of Walden, delays in external IRB approval, obstacles that they encounter unexpectedly when they're trying to collect data from external institutions, and other types of delays that are truly outside of the control of the student. If, in fact, the student is truly making good faith effort to access the data and make progress, in these cases, you as the chair can award the student an S because you feel like the student is making good faith effort and the types of progress that's being delayed are outside of the student's control. It's really important to note, though, that if those delays continue into the next term and there's concern about whether the student is actually going to be able to gain access to that data at that site, then it might be time to actually look for a different site. So what you would need to do is to make certain that you're working with the student to provide them with other avenues and help them think about other avenues if needed. One thing to remember is CRQ actually may be able to provide some support for students who experience any of these types of obstacles. We have experience with access to secure data, helping students gain access to secure data, working with external IRB boards, and development of alternative paths. We have great secondary data that we can help students, look into if that's something that would be an option. But we don't want to have, more than one term where a student is not making the progress because of delays outside of their control. We'd like to think that second term then that you are helping them, guiding them, giving support, direction, so that they can look at alternatives if they need to, so that they can, in fact, have access to, whether it's an approved external IRB or whether it's getting access to external data. And, so as many of us know, many of our students have a number of life experiences that do come up that may, in fact, require them to take a leave of absence. I know many of our students really do not want to take a leave of absence, and they want to keep working toward completing their work. On the other hand, it's important for you as the chair, for any of us as the chair, as we work with our students, to have a good conversation with the students. And I would say at the beginning of each term, it doesn't hurt to remind students, if family health issues come up or personal health issues or something's going on at work that's outside of their control that causes them to be pulled away from devoting time to their work, that might be a legitimate reason for this student to truly think about taking a leave of absence for that time period. If, in fact, the chair advises the student to drop or to withdraw from a doctoral study course and the student continues to stay enrolled, even though they've been given advice, and then the student doesn't meet those goals, then the student would actually receive a U because they didn't follow the guidance of their chair or mentor. If this should happen after the drop or withdrawal period and the student actually is not meeting the goals that they've agreed to with the term plan and their grade is actually going to be a U, the chair could, if the circumstances warranted, the chair could actually advise the student to document those issues with disability services, and then they would be able to petition for a retroactive withdrawal. I know all of us have challenges getting our students to understand that it is actually okay when warranted to take that leave of absence, but it is important to have that conversation with them. I know we've covered a lot of material tonight, and for many of you, this is a review, and, we do want to review because we continue to get questions. But now we're going to have a couple of questions that Lori Bedford's going to lead us through. So, Lori, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to open up some polls, and let's see, the first one is an unsatisfactory may be given in the following instances. And, oh, you know what? We still have the results from the last time we did this. So I'll clear that and reopen that for you. Apologize for that. So an unsatisfactory grade may be given in the following instances. Check all that apply. The omission or failure to participate in course expectations, attendance as residency as the only activity completed, submission of several drafts of the problem statement, a student's request for leniency with a promise to do better next term. So just a couple seconds, just click right on the screen. Check all that you think may be a reason to give an unsatisfactory grade. So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. And Deborah, do you want to talk a little bit about this question and the responses?
Certainly. Yes, you know, as we've mentioned, students do need to participate in all of the major course requirements. And I believe Laura also pointed out earlier that if the only activity that the student completes is attendance at a residency, that would not be sufficient in and of itself. And as we all know, students are always asking us, oh, please, you know, give me, you know, a little more understanding. You know, I've had these things come up and I really will do better next time, and that's, again, not acceptable. It is, however, acceptable if a student has several drafts of a problem statement. We know that students may go through several drafts throughout their journey, many iterations of different sections, so that would not be a reason to give them a U. It is fine for them to go through several drafts. We're hoping, however, as they're going through those several drafts, that you're giving them feedback and they're addressing that feedback. So, and just want to take a minute as Lori's clearing this and we're moving on to the next question to remind everyone, if any of you have any suggestions or questions, be sure and follow those in the chat box. I know each of you have your own experiences, and we'd love to hear about your experiences in dealing with any of these issues as well.
Right, and I'd like to kind of jump in and just, before we move on to the next question, just add on to the point that it's critical how the term plan is crafted. And Deborah's absolutely right in terms of you know, the selections, but it's really going to be critical how the specificity of what you work with your student to make sure is in the term plan, and for that accountability. Okay. And now we have our next question. It looks like people have responded to it already, which is expectations for satisfactory progress include. All right. And I think
all right, we'll go ahead and end that poll, and then you can go ahead and talk about this one. Laura, Deborah, okay. I don't remember which one of you were going to talk about this.
Oh, Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, go
yes.
Okay. And so, you know, expectations for satisfactory progress include, and it looks like a lot of people said submission of a term plan within the first 7 days. Also, many people said documented progress towards goals and work products as outlined in the term plan through timely communication with their chair, weekly phone calls and or emails to the chair describing progress, completion of a major milestone. And, you know, these, you know, many of these are examples of things that can be, and it really is, like I said before, dependent on the term plan, but it is absolutely essential that there is a submission of term plan within the first 7 days, and that's a requirement. You know, that has to, it also relates to the students, you know, evidence of the students' ongoing registration within the university, in addition to having that plan in place within 7 days. So that's important. And the next one, as many of you identified as well, documented progress towards goals. And work products is outlined through the term plan, timely communication with the chair. Now, the other two, completion of a major milestone, it really depends if that is something. It can include that, but it really depends on if it's something that you have identified. as something that needs to happen, and that there is a clear idea of how that will happen in this time. And then phone calls and emails, that's a good practice, a best practice, and can definitely support progress, but that's not necessarily something that is something in the term plan or something that is relating to someone achieving an S or a U. All right. Okay. And now
Are we ready to move on, Laura?
Yeah, our third question. I've advanced.
Okay, yep, I'll get that up for you here in just a second. Whoops.
Oh, we got to go back. I advanced that, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Here, I'll get this last one up. Excuse me.
And for this question, we have, which of the following would not be an example of an issue outside of the student's control for which an S may be considered? So remember that it's a little confusing. This is kind of a trick question. Which one would not be an example of an issue outside of the student's control?
Yeah, we'll just give a couple more seconds and have folks go ahead and vote. All right, we have a lot of agreement here, so
Yeah.
yeah. So Deborah, were you going to talk about this one?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. As we discussed earlier, if a student is delayed due to access from an external agency or university in gaining access, and it's outside of their control, that's okay. If the student continues to make good faith effort and the chair believes that the student is in fact making, progress in the other areas that they've, identified, this delay from an agency or university delay to access would not be a reason to give a student a U, but would in fact be outside the student's control, in which an S could still be considered. Delays in external IRB approval, again, if this is outside the student's control, and it is because it's external IRB approval, and again, if the student is making good faith effort and the chair believes the student deserves to have that satisfactory grade because the only delay is due to the external IRB and meeting those term plans, again, the reason to give the student a satisfactory grade if in fact they're making effort. It looks like everyone really appreciated the fact that obstacles created from a family emergency would not fall into this category. As we discussed before, obstacles based on a family emergency would be a reason to encourage a student to take a leave of absence. But if a student had this come up, that would not be a reason where a student could still qualify for a satisfactory grade.
Right, and adding on to that, I think what is essential is regular communication. Making sure that the student is kind of letting you know as soon as something comes up, because we see issues happen, where there's problems, where they get to the very end and then they say, well, I had this family emergency, or I was sick, or this or that. Really, making sure that there is that really regular communication throughout the term. So if something does go awry, or there is a problem, or something that's going to set back a little bit, or a lot, that is something you're aware of, and that really, I think, is critical for you feeling comfortable with the assigning of the grade, and being able to support the student with what needs to happen to ensure that they make progress or take a leave of absence.
And I think it's really important when you're having that continuous communication with students to always talk to them about their time frame. Often our students really do need to think about a certain time frame in which they need to complete their dissertation or doctoral study. And one of the things that we found is that particular conversation doesn't happen as often as, is always necessary, because other things do come up, like say these life events. And so continuing to revisit that with the student, has something happened that causes us to need to adjust your time frame, and then also talking to students about different ways to manage their time. As we've talked about, this continuous communication and mentoring is really important. And Laura, I don't know if this might be, I know you mentioned the constant communication, if this might be a good time to take a minute and share some of the successful optional communication methods with technology now that might be helpful in some of the more weekly or if for some people even daily communications with their students, as an alternative.
Yeah, certainly. And, we have, we had a good session about this at faculty meeting, and but what we want to, there are a lot of ways, and it is about, and we talked about this in the committee roles and best desired practices webinar too, is kind of being able to meet your student where they're at in the ways that work for them. And in some cases, being able to use technology like Google Hangouts or Google Drive or OneDrive. There's various formats and platforms. Some students do well from a video chat to discuss, because they're stuck on how to develop their problem statement. They need to review it. I've had some experiences on committees I've served on using the shared drive. It creates this transparency, especially for those of you working with students in qualitative dissertations. There can be drafts, coded data analysis, review of the articles. I had a student that really wasn't sure about some of the articles she was selecting, and it didn't take long. Even if I couldn't get on the phone, I could look at this, on the shared drive. So there's ways that, I know it might seem a little overwhelming when you think about, being in contact with your student every week or multiple times during the week, but there are ways to do that require very little time, and then the drafts that you're looking at are in much better shape, and you're able to give that next level of feedback to move them forward rather than having them start over or revisit things that you could have looked at real quickly. A paragraph here, data analysis there. These are some things that multiple faculty are working with to support their students, and I think can be very effective. But for some too, based on your students' comfort level with these technologies, sometimes a phone call is enough to really help create that. So it doesn't have to be necessarily any of these new technologies, but they can be really helpful for just in time. Just chat. Some people use Skype for business or instant messaging or things like that to have these quick exchanges as well. I mean, it has to be within your comfort level, but I encourage you to consider those ways to support your students in real time. And you can give them, it can take 2 minutes, and those 2 minutes of you looking at something and responding, they're moving forward. They're not stuck. They're not waiting, and they're able to keep moving. So I do encourage that. But it's doctoral education and the research process are occasionally unpredictable, and we, as the mentor or chair, you're responsible for making a holistic assessment of progress in the term. So the main thing we want to tell you, and this is something we've talked with program leadership about, so that I know they're in complete agreement on this. I know it's difficult at the end to think of that grade, especially in those cases where you feel like you've done everything you can to support the student. They really haven't met the expectation, and you feel like it's appropriate to assign a U. You do have that support, and for some students, that's the wake-up call they need, and they'll turn things around. And we do have resources that program directors require for students who receive a U to help them if it is that they have a major skill gap or something is identified that's really causing their obstacle. Some of our even resources that are at cost are free for that term to help them get back on track and really get where they need to be to start making progress. Because we know some of our students have major writing issues and some other issues too that we really want to help them be successful. But we want you to know, I know some faculty have expressed in the past that they were worried that they would not be supported by program leadership or university leadership. You will be supported, but we do also, given your understanding and your commitment to embracing these guidelines, we do support your wisdom for a holistic assessment on your students' progress. And we're here to support you. And we have a roll account, resource advice at waldenu.edu. If you realize your student needs a resource that's going to help them, we have several resources, and many of them are not yet fully taken advantage of. And we can help connect you with the resource that would be best to help your student. So keep in mind, we have things like methodology office hours, IRB office hours, and several tutorials, just several things in the Writing Center. So really, I know that some of you may be working with students that seem to have some major challenges that were just realized now that they're in the capstone phase. And, you may feel like you can only teach so much, and they need additional support and remediation. And we have that here for you, and we want to make sure we support you in connecting your students with that too.
And this is Deborah. I'd just like to add one thing. We've had over the past year a number of chairs who have reached out to us in CRQ and expressed concern that for the first time they're actually having to give several U's to students, and that they were kind of uncomfortable with it. But they were going to move forward and do what they needed to do, but they wanted us to know that it was difficult, especially if this was a student who had been receiving satisfactory grades for a while. Well, what's really terrific is those same faculty, many of them have come back and said, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm glad we have this policy, because after I gave the student the U when we talked about it, then we talked about what they needed to do the next term to get a satisfactory grade, the student responded. The student really sat up, took notice, and it did serve as a wake-up call in a sense. So we have had some very positive responses to what was a tough decision based on then students actually beginning to make the substantive progress that's needed.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah.
I do see one question in the chat. Deborah, were you responding to Tracy's question about the incomplete, complete versus satisfactory, unsatisfactory grading schema?
Right. I was trying to determine what program Tracy might be in, and if that was in the research forum.
Okay, so
that
Tracy,
they had the
if you're on the phone, go ahead and unmute yourself. Otherwise, if you could just let us know, and then Deborah can give you some more insight into that.
We can follow up on that. Thank you very much, Tracy. Yeah, we'll follow up. Again, going back to some of the program-specific guidance, some programs I do know when this policy was implemented, the enhanced grading policy was implemented, some programs did go in and have to make changes to their grade book. And at the time, I'm trying to think, DNP may have been a little earlier in the program and may not have had students at that stage. But we'll certainly follow up and make certain that we're consistent. So thank you for raising that, Tracy.
Thanks to Deborah. Other questions that are still outstanding, please feel free to type them in the chat box. And while we're waiting for questions, Laura, anything else you'd like to add? We have about 15 minutes for questions and to provide more information here.
All right. Well, one thing I want to encourage is, especially for those of you who are newer in your familiarity with this policy, but even those that are still, working along with it, please don't hesitate to reach out to us to support you. We've learned so much from the questions that we receive, and we want to help you to support your students and to work within the policy. We understand it's not always an easy answer, an easy decision, and we do have resources on our team to help you with that. So, don't worry about, sending us questions anytime. on that, whether it's about resources to resource advice, or you can write directly to myself or Deborah, and we'll support you. Because, both Deborah and I and Matt, who manages our resource advice role account, have extensive committee experience, and we understand the struggle of, working with specific students and also making these determinations. So we're happy to support you with that, and we'd like to hear, how it's going. And I also want to encourage you, please, because I know you get a lot of email, you get a lot of notices. Please pay attention to the upcoming faculty development webinar lists and things like that, because there's stuff that I think are the next level from this, on committee. On committee roles, on working with your students within these guidelines, early URR engagement, and there's going to be some other things coming up that we're working on right now that I think you'll find very interesting for guidance support. But we've learned a lot from the webinars, doing them last time, that the opportunity to engage with other of your faculty members and learn from each other is so critically important. So we're working on those opportunities to not just hear us talk, but for you to be able to talk to each other and learn from your experiences. So there's, I'm just trying to give you an alert that there's more to come, and I know that working on committees sometimes can feel pretty isolated, and we're working to remedy that and make sure that you feel supported in multiple ways and have opportunities for information and development in this area.
Thanks, Laura. And thank you, Deborah, for addressing Tracy's question. It looks like you guys are going to have some more conversation about that. James has asked a question: is there a session on TaskStream and how to help our students and myself? And then, so Deborah, you're going to send James some information on that?
Yeah, James, if you will email me, I will, we'll see exactly what the questions are, and we'll make certain that we provide you the additional support. No problem at all.
Right, yeah, there are extensive resources in that area, but want to make sure we connect you with exactly what you need. So thank you.
Right.
Thanks. And so before we end, Deborah, was there anything else that you'd like to share tonight?
No, Jess, I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight. And thank you, Lori.
And I also appreciate both you, Deborah, and Laura, for sharing your expertise with us. These are really important topics, and the conversation just continues to get richer and richer. And I'd like to thank all the participants, too, for taking time out of your evening to talk about this. It's important for our students' success, and it's important for keeping them on track. So further questions, or if you'd like to talk about this some more, I'm certain I speak for our presenters today when I say feel free to email them and email the CRQ role accounts with your questions. I'll be following up tomorrow with a copy of the recording and the handout, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. So with that, I'd like to welcome. Was somebody else trying to jump in there?
That was just me, Lori. Just wanted to, kind of call out a special thanks to you as our coordinator and guide in this, and appreciation for helping everything to go so smooth. So thank you, as always.
Thank you, Laura. It's my pleasure to work with you guys and all of the faculty that are here with us tonight. So I wish you a great rest of your evening, and if you please take a moment to fill out the survey, that would be great. Good night.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.